welcome to my channel where it's Halloween all year long. My name is Lauren. Welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about my top 2 and my bottom 2 reads of October. October was an amazing month of reading for me. It was a month where I feel like all of us here on BookTube, especially HorrorTube, were like, this is the time to get reading in, and we jam-packed our TBRs with like so many books to read. And so I feel like I was able to achieve my goals because I was very realistic, but it was super fun to be able to participate in my first readathon, which was the Hollow Weekend readathon. So huge shout out to Lexi from Books with Lexi, as well as all of her amazing co-hosts who made this month so fun. I loved getting to do something with other people that we all were like super big fans of, which is just like reading and doing all the spooky things. So instead of going through each individual book that I read in the month of October, I thought it'd just be awesome to highlight my top 2 and my bottom 2 reads of the month. I read 3 novellas, 1 YA book, 2 middle grade books, and 7 adult horror novels. So in total, in October, I read 13 books, which is astounding to me, considering that is not my normal range of books. Typically, I read like around 6, 7, 8 fiction novels a month. So I think it was really just like the vibes of like wanting Halloween, like wanting to go really hard with like the Halloween horror vibes. So looking at my top 2 reads for the month of October, the first one has to be Cirque Berserk by Jessica Guess. This book is so fast-paced, and you get the POV of the villains in this book, and like you're kind of supposed to empathize with them. I found it to be very interesting because that kind of POV I'm not typically exposed to with like the books I've read so far. I love the setting of a carnival, especially one that is like abandoned. That was a great setting, and I love how the place and like the space was used as a huge like focal point in the story, really kind of like moving the plot along and like really integrated within what was happening in the story. And I don't want to tell you too much, but one thing I will say about the ending is that I wish that there was a different ending. Like, I know I'm supposed to be rooting for a certain group of people, but you know, I guess I just gotten so used to certain endings in stories, and that's kind of what I was wanting. And so if you've read this book, you know what I'm talking about. We're like the very, very end, but there's people you're supposed to be empathizing with in this story that are not necessarily the quote unquote good guys, but you really have this hazy understanding of like who's good, who's bad. And I think that's like the whole point of this story, is to like kind of play with that typical binary approach to like good guy, bad guy in a story. There's like points in the story where like I stopped breathing, like it was super intense and you don't really know what is happening. And it is like one of the most effective slasher books that I've ever read. I feel like the tension and the intensity of like the moment and what's happening being so like action-packed of a book, I don't think I really get that in a lot of text experiences with horror. I think I usually have that kind of visceral reaction when I watch horror on a movie screen or TV screen. I feel like Jessica Guess had like a really great writing style and approach to this book that felt so much like a movie. Like it should so be a movie. So for my second top book read of October, I'm kind of stuck between 2. One is going to be a novella, which is Goddess of Filth by V. Castro. And the second is a middle grade read titled The Undrowned by K.R. Alexander. So I really loved Goddess of Filth because it is a really unconventional possession story, but I think I really want to give a shout out to K.R. Alexander's The Undrowned because it is such a sophisticated middle grade read. You have one girl, again, who is like very much not a good person. And obviously, like, you're supposed to empathize with her since you see the story through her eyes. But she's not a very likable person, especially in the beginning, but you really grow to like kind of understand her a little bit more. And she's like in middle school. And so her growth and development, like you could totally see why she feels the way she does. Like it would be different if it was an adult. You know, she's just a kid. And so she's experiencing things and then reacting. And that's what kids do when you don't have a support system at home or anywhere in your life that is helping you like move through trauma in a very productive and healthy way. So that's kind of like a result of that. The Undrowned is an adventure of a book. The creatures in this book are not beautiful, but like the writing is so beautiful and like it really takes you there in the moment, and you really see like the disgusting aspects of this creature, and you see how revolted the main character is. Like the writing is very well done. It is very descriptive, and you really have this image in your head of what this creature is. And so it's kind of like a friendship story in there, the horrors of friendship, the horrors of middle school, you know, the horrors of growing up. There's so much that an author can work with there. And I think it is really like personified through the allegory of the creature that is playing a central role in this book. I actually have plans to read another middle grade K.R. Alexander book in November. So I'm a huge fan of their work and cannot wait to read more. Okay, now for my bottom 2 books read in the month of October. Okay, it's kind of tough. I don't feel like there was any books that I was like, oh God, that was like awful, total waste of time. So that's nice to know. But if I had to choose, I think I could pick 2 that were very obviously not 5-star reads for me. One of those is going to be Kill Creek by Scott Thomas. This was a highly anticipated read of mine. People speak so highly about this book. I have a vlog where I talk about this more in more depth, but I felt like to kind of keep it succinctly explained, I felt like because there were so many characters in the book with their own like traumatic backstories that informed how they were in the present timeline of the narrative, that I didn't have an opportunity to really get invested in the story, and it felt more tedious. It is a haunted house story where you have 4 writers spending the night getting interviewed in this really haunted house. And you learn as you go that like the house, even though they leave the house doesn't leave them. And that's a big part of the story. Then they come back and they learn about the whole entity that is kind of controlling the house. And you just kind of learn about the house in general as they come back into it. And then it's just like chaos. And then the reveal of the house, I don't think was all that revelatory. Okay, so the last book here I feel like was my least favorite book read this month. I guess I'm stuck between 2 once again, and that is going to be Pet Semetary by Stephen King and The Shadows by Alex North. Which is funny because when I was reading The Shadows, in the middle of that, I feel like I could not put it down and I wanted to like always pick it up and read it. But I feel like as I was going through the book, I realized like, okay, it's not actually the book I thought it was, and I started to enjoy it less and less as I went. But I feel like the book I struggled to pick up the most this month is probably going to be Pet Semetary by Stephen King, which is a bummer because I really did like parts of this book. I don't think I will like totally throw it out because I did have a personal copy of this book in my possession that I read. But I think that the book, I mean, it was my first exploration of Stephen King. I don't think I really like his world building. He does spend a lot of time building character backstories and kind of creating a world and really having you be immersed in it. And he creates really lengthy books. And that is some people's jam. And I don't think it really is my cup of tea. And that's fine, right? Everybody has their own interests. But I did want to at least read one Stephen King book. I think after this, I will want to read maybe some of the short story anthologies that he has published. But there were parts I did like about Pet Semetary. And there are some parts I did not. So I'll start off with the things I didn't care for. I didn't care for a lot of like the tedious aspects of the life that these characters lived. It's kind of like a Stephen King thing. Not my thing. And I also did not care for the native burial ground trope. I know he wrote this a while back, but people were critiquing like the uses and misuses of indigenous peoples and cultures in those books at that time in the United States and around the world. So yeah, there's really just no excuse for that, even though we have more awareness about media literacy today in 2022. So not a super enjoyable thing for me to read this like magical indigenous entity that's just causing more harm and erasure of actual indigenous realities. And something I actually really did like about this novel is the discussions regarding death and grief and the commentary on our society in the United States being really like death phobic. And I think you really see that illustrated and demonstrated well with the wife being like so touchy on the topic of death and grief of her own like sister who died. And then this like idea of like not wanting to accept death. That's like a big central theme in this story, like not accepting death. Even though the person we see the story mostly through, which is going to be the doctor, the father in the family, you don't really like, he is around death all the time as a doctor, and yet when he experiences death in a very close way, he cannot accept it. So I think it speaks to the lengths people will go in order to not accept death, even though this is like the supernatural reality. And as somebody who, like myself, is fascinated by the concept of death, loss, and grief due to their own personal experiences, to the point where like I have a podcast about it, I love books that integrate grief horror, or like the grief trope. I don't even know if it's like a trope, but yeah, so I enjoyed that aspect of the book. So I don't think it is a book that I'm gonna like throw out or anything like that. I do enjoy the book and I appreciate it once I had finished it, but I just wasn't really like devouring it as I was experiencing the book. But great discussions on death and grief that I think are super important. And also just super fascinating too. So there you have it, my top 2, my bottom 2 books read in October. I'd love to know what was your top and bottom book of October. Let me know down in the comments below. I hope you're having a great start to November. I'll see y'all in my next video. Bye!